So I got an interesting question here from Vic over on YouTube, and basically what he's asked is he's given me a list of his equipment that he has, and he's asked how I would put that into a chain. So basically what he's got is a Rupert Neve Portico 2, he's got a Rupert Neve diode bridge compressor, a Whitestone P331 saturation unit, an SPL Pass EQ, a Shadow Hills dual Van de Graaff. Now, what I would recommend is looking at the kit that's in there is I would probably use the Rupert Neve diode bridge compressor, almost like a bus compressor, to start the mix. Now I use, as my bus comp, I use the Wes Audio NG bus comp. And I use that as it's like a G bus. Basically what I'm simulating there is that the mix is running on a console. It's then hitting the G bus comp like you would on an SSL console. Classic glue. You could almost use the diode bridge compressor for that purpose. And I'm only saying this because there are two good compressors in there, the Shadow Hills dual Van de Graaff and the diode bridge compressor. Look, otherwise you're going to have two at the very end of the chain. So I would probably use the diode bridge compressor at the start of the chain, use that almost like a bus comp, try and glue that mix together using that. Then what I would go into is the Rupert Neve Portico. Now most people would use this as a compressor, and that's kind of what it's designed to be. But what I would say to everybody is, don't use it as a compressor. I'm not a fan of it as a compressor. I don't think it's a great compressor at all. What I am a fan of it for, and what I use it for straight after my Wes Audio NG bus comp, is I use it as a stereo field editor straight after. Now what this is doing, so the first thing I'm hitting is that bus comp, that's gluing the mix together. The next thing I'm hitting is that stereo field editor. Now what that's doing is that's giving me that image. I'm creating the image that I want going forward. So I'm using it to tailor that stereo image, give me some width, give me some body. It's all mid-side, so it's all processing in a way that's going to give you a perfect tailored image. And believe me, using it like that, it's a very unique way of using it. But here's the thing, it's one of, if not the best stereo field editors you will ever use. Try and use it, just attempt to use it like that, because I highly recommend using it like that. Next, I would then, and what I do is I then run into my black box HG2. So you could run into your Whitestone P331. Now the reason I run into that next is what I'm doing here is I'm gluing the mix together. I'm then adding that stereo image. I'm getting that stereo image tailored. I'm then adding saturation. What I'm doing is I'm getting that digital mix, and I'm making it glow. I'm adding some width, I'm gluing it together, I'm adding the width, and I'm adding body, I'm adding saturation to get the overall sound that's then going into the rest of the chain via EQ and compression. So next, I would recommend we go into the SPL Pass EQ. Now the thing with the Pass EQ, I used to have one, and I swapped it actually for the SPL PQ. And the one thing I found with the Pass EQ was it was somewhat limited. It wasn't like, I've got a Pass EQ, I'm not going to need any other EQs. So the thing with a Pass EQ is you are going to want to eventually at some point add something that's a bit more of a surgical EQ. The Pass EQ, I never found it to be that much of a surgical EQ. It was very much, I always thought of it as, I do my EQ and then I use my Pass EQ as something, as a little bit of an extra kind of sound, and a bit more of an EQ that I'm adding to my already EQ that I'm using. I would put it, look, I put it in after the Whitestone just because it's the only EQ that you have, but at a later date, get another EQ to work with it and put that next to it. The one I'd recommend, well, would I recommend? No, I'd recommend something like the Buzz or even the PQ. The Pass EQ and the PQ would perfectly work together. Then I would say move into the Shadow Hills dual Van de Graaff. Now the Shadow Hills dual Van de Graaff, if anyone's ever used one, throw a vocal through it. It's one of the best compressors to run vocals through. It's honestly, it is incredible. We used to have one when we had a 500 series chain, and we swapped it for a Shadow Hills mastering compressor, and now since swapped it for the Optograph Shadow Hills. It has all the sort of flavour that you come to expect from the Shadow Hills mastering compressor, but in 500 series format. It's far cheaper as well. I mean, it's still expensive. It's nearly, I think it's like £2,000+ now, which is very expensive for a 500 series unit. So really, that's the kind of chain that I would run. So I'd go into the diode bridge compressor, the Rupert Neve diode bridge compressor, use that almost to glue the mix together. I then run into the Rupert Neve Portico 2, add my stereo imaging. I then run into the Whitestone P331, get that saturation and that glow on the mix. I then go into the EQ, do all my EQing with the SPL Pass EQ. One thing I would recommend adding, I've got one over there, is the SPL Gemini. Throw that in, give yourself mid-side with either a PQ or a Pass EQ, and that's an incredible pairing. Then I'd run into the Shadow Hills Dual Van de Graaff and do that, because that's going to be a great kind of, it is basically a mastering compressor of somewhat. You can use it as a mastering compressor. I used the Dual Van de Graaff as a mastering compressor for many years, and it was brilliant, really good. I mean, that is a good chain. The only thing I think that chain is lacking is some mid-side EQ and a full range kind of EQ that's more of a surgical EQ. What else? I mean, you could add like a lull limiter, one of them, and they're different class, but very expensive. And let's be honest, you can go back in the box and hit L2, and it's still good. So yeah, I mean, there's not a great deal. You need to add, look, adding mid-side into there is going to be highly beneficial. Adding a surgical EQ on top of the Pass EQ is going to be highly beneficial as well. So they're my recommendations reading that chain. I mean, these are nice videos to do. If anyone else has got a kind of chain they want me to kind of go through, and I'll tell you how I'd kind of chain it all together and how I'd make it if I was using it. And yeah, I mean, this is a good chain. You get a great sound out of this. There's some real good, like the Whitestone P331. They're really good. We've got one in our other mastering studio, and they're pretty good. Yeah, they're really good. So yeah, that's how I'd set that chain up.